I joked at a party that my husband was too weak to protect me. What I thought was just teasing ended up embarrassing him and ultimately destroying our marriage. My name is Wanda, I'm from Colorado, and I'm 34 years old. The problem is that I've always believed James and I had a strong bond. He is 36, easygoing, and doesn't worry about much, which I find to be a good balance because I can be a little, well, intense at times. We attended a party hosted by his friend Mike that evening. I try to get James to get out with people when he genuinely wants to because he doesn't have many pals. I assumed that in a couple of hours, we would go, have a few drinks, and depart. It began as usual. James had been friends with most of these people for years, so it was not surprising that the house was full of people who appeared to know one another. I never mind that I didn't know everyone. I can blend in rather well, and to be honest, when I feel like it, I kind of enjoy being the focus of attention. I therefore socialized a little while James caught up with Mike. After a few hours, we all found ourselves in this circle, merely chatting and joking about unrelated topics. Relationships were brought up at one point, such as how much you trust your partner to support you in the event that things go wrong. I smiled at the question, even though it was all hypothetical. Before giving it any consideration, I muttered something along the lines of, "Oh, I know James wouldn't be able to protect me. I mean, look at him." James was sitting next to me, quietly as usual. I had that small rush when you realize you've said something hilarious and it made people laugh, a lot. So I continued. I made fun of him for not working out and for occasionally barely opening jars. I also made a joke about how we would both be victims if someone tried to mug us since he would simply freeze. People were laughing themselves to death. The whole thing started when Mike even joked that James was missing leg day. However, James remained silent. Like he didn't want to make it awkward, he just sat there with this strange half-smile. He wasn't laughing though, as I could tell. So, naturally, I doubled down rather than stopped. Seriously though, he's got arms like a sixth grader. No offense, babe, I added, gesturing to his arms. Once more, people lost it. It was funny, after all. Furthermore, it's not as though I said anything untrue. Then, suddenly, James got to his feet. Suddenly he stood up, picked up his jacket, and left the room. Nothing, no explanation. Initially, I assumed he was simply using the restroom or needed some air, but after a few minutes, when he didn't return, I knew he was gone. As in, gone. Immediately, the atmosphere in the room changed. There was this awkward pause after everyone had ceased laughing. Mike said to me, "You okay?" That was kind of harsh, which confused me because I thought it was a joke. A joke? I didn't break any unwritten rules or anything. We've teased each other before. I still made an effort to hide it. I was irritated on the inside, but I shrugged and replied, "He's probably just tired or whatever. He's fine." As in, what was wrong with him? Nobody there was going to think less of him, and it's not like I was lying. If nothing else, I hoped that by making him laugh at himself, I would make him appear good. It wasn't the same, but I stayed at the party for a little while longer. Although everyone was courteous, there was a strange atmosphere, and I had a strange mixture of embarrassment and annoyance. At last, I bid farewell and dialed an Uber. James was in bed acting like he was asleep when I arrived home. I remained silent with him. I assumed that by dawn, he would have moved on. However, things were different the following day. He hardly talked to me. When he did, it was clipped and brief, as if he didn't care. He simply looked at me and stated, "You humiliated me in front of my friends," when I asked him what his problem was. Again, I didn't believe it was that serious, so that took me by surprise. I said, "It was a joke, James. Don't be so sensitive." He didn't answer. Instead, he simply left the room. I knew then that he was not going to let this go. James was already awake and drinking his coffee at the kitchen table when I woke up the following morning. I was instantly annoyed that he didn't look up when I stepped in. I understand that he was unhappy last night, but I couldn't stand this silence treatment. "Morning," I murmured as I poured coffee for myself. No answer. He continued to swipe through his phone as if I hadn't been there. I sat down opposite him and said, "Okay, are we seriously doing this? Because if we are, let's just get it over with." His voice was stern but not loud, and he put down his phone before turning to face me. "Why would you think it's okay to humiliate me like that in front of my friends?" he asked. "It was a joke," I answered, rolling my eyes. "Oh my God, James, are you still on this? I wasn't trying to humiliate you." He said, "Well, that's exactly what you did. You made me feel like a fool in front of everyone. You don't think I already know I'm not the strongest guy in the world? You didn't need to put it on display like that." I crossed my arms and reclined in my chair. Okay, but you left me there, James. Alone. You're mad about a joke, but you thought it was fine to just walk out and leave your wife at your friend's house? How is that okay? I needed to get out of there, he shook his head saying. Do you have any idea how disrespectful you were? You don't talk about your husband like that, Wanda, especially not in front of other people. It's like you were trying to embarrass me. Moving on to the story's punctuated version, more out of frustration than anything else, I gave a little laugh. James, it was teasing. Everyone was laughing. It's not like I stood up and gave a speech about how you're a failure, and honestly, walking out like that didn't exactly prove me wrong. You left me there to Uber home like some random person. What kind of man does that? I saw him tightening his jaw as his face flushed. His voice became louder as he asked, You don't get it, do you? You don't respect me. If you did, you wouldn't have said half the stuff you did last night. You wouldn't have kept going when you saw how uncomfortable I was. I flung my fists up. Of course I respect you, James. But you didn't exactly act respectable last night, did you? A grown man doesn't just storm out and leave his wife behind because he's upset over a joke. You could have pulled me aside and said something. Instead, you bailed, and now you want to lecture me about respect. I could tell he was thinking about what I had said because he looked at me for a long time. At last, he let out a sigh and combed through his hair. You're right, he said in a whisper. I shouldn't have left you there. That wasn't okay. I arched an eyebrow, taken aback that he was genuinely acknowledging it. Yeah, that's what I thought. I leaned forward and murmured. So maybe next time don't overreact and make things worse. If you had just talked to me, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. He stared down at his coffee for a moment without saying anything. He whispered, I just wish you'd consider how what you say affects me. I'm not asking you to change who you are, just think about it. Since he had apologized, I shrugged, not wanting to press the issue any further. Sure, I'll think about it. But you also need to think about how you handle things. Deal? He nodded, but his expression remained irritated. Although I could sense that this was not the end for him, I felt that the issue had been resolved. Following our talk, I felt rather well. When James said he was sorry, I knew I had won the argument, and that was that for me. He was still a touch strange, to be sure, but he would go on. He did. That was the nature of our relationship. I would stand my ground when he became outraged about something, and ultimately he would change his mind. I no longer even needed to consider it. James wasn't exactly the sort to take the initiative. Whether it was planning, managing money, or choosing what to watch on TV, I had always been the one who kept our relationship going. It didn't bother him. In fact, I believe he enjoyed it that way. He never really argued with me about it. I am not exaggerating when I say that I was in charge. We were that way, and it worked. For me, it did the trick. James informed me that he was going out to supper with some buddies a few nights later. He said, Mike and the guys, as if that were all I needed to know. I arched an eyebrow without pressing him. One of those guys' nights where they all gather and work out their frustrations over burgers and beer, most likely discussing how terrible I am and how James deserves better, is what this was about, I suppose. I wasn't a moron. To be honest, I wasn't shocked by their reactions to me after the party. When it comes to gossiping, guys like Mike and his group are just as awful as women, despite their constant pretense of being above the drama. I remained silent though. Whatever, if James needed to vent to them, permit him. After he returned home, things would resume as usual. However, something had changed by the time he returned that evening. He wasn't coming in with accusations or anything, so it wasn't a big deal. It was more subdued. He seemed to be deep in concentration, as he was more subdued than normal. In response to my question about how supper went, he simply shrugged and remarked, It was fine. In an attempt to lighten the situation, I asked, Just fine? What, did Mike overcook the steak or something? With a slight, almost forced smile, he told me, No, the food was good, just had a lot on my mind. For James, that was strange? Usually, he would tell me everything they discussed, even who said what and whose joke made me laugh the most. Not this time, though. He dismissed it this time and went to bed early, leaving me sitting there in complete confusion. I began to notice further changes over the course of the following several days. First, small things. I proposed we watch a movie, but he didn't seem as interested in following through on my intentions. You pick. I'll just watch whatever, he stated in a tone that was more irritated than uninterested. Or he casually said that he might go hiking with Mike instead, which was not something he usually did, when I brought up our weekend plans. James had no interest in being outside. And it wasn't simply what he did, it was his disposition. Maybe he was more certain. There is no other way for me to explain it. As if he didn't wait for my blessing before acting. I didn't like it, and I wasn't used to it. It felt like he was separating from me, as if he were closing me out, and I didn't know why. It's not like I want to control him or anything, well, maybe a bit. I finally brought it up one evening. I mentioned, "You've been acting different lately," as we prepared to go to bed. "What's going on?" I thought for a moment that he was going to deny it when he glanced at me. Then he replied, "I've just been thinking a lot. About us, about me, about what I want." That confused me. I continued, attempting to sound cool. "What you want? What's that supposed to mean?" He gave a shrug. "Just that I've been letting things slide for too long. I've been too passive, whatever. I need to start standing up for myself more, that's all." I pretended to chuckle, but I was actually experiencing a strange uneasiness. "You make it sound like I've been running a dictatorship or something. Is this about the party? Because we already talked about that." He said, "It's not just the party," while maintaining eye contact with me. "It's everything." Suddenly, the topic of conversation changed. No longer was it about a single night or joke. It concerned our relationship as a whole. And I became aware for the first time that he might not be content with the status quo. I began to question whether I was losing control for the first time. One evening after work, James came home, and I could immediately tell he was thinking about something. He was wearing that serious expression he gets just before saying something he had spent hours practicing in his mind. But I didn't ask what it was. He'd inform me if it was essential, or at least that's how it generally worked. And he finally spoke out while I was clearing the plates after we ate dinner, which was very silent. "We need to talk." Already irritated, I sighed. "Okay, what now?" It was unusual that he didn't recoil at my tone. Rather, he folded his arms and sat back in his chair. "Why do you treat me the way you do?" I was surprised by that. "What are you even talking about?" "I mean the way you talk to me. The way you act like you're the only one who matters in this relationship. Do you even respect me, Wanda? Honestly?" I gave an eye roll. "Of course I respect you, James. You're my husband. Why are you even asking me that?" Angry, he shook his head. "Because you don't act like it. You humiliated me in front of my friends, and when I tried to tell you how I felt, you made it about how I overreacted. You don't listen to me. You don't care what I want, and half the time, it feels like I'm just here to be your punching bag." "That's not fair," I retorted. "I wasn't trying to humiliate you. I told you it was a joke. You're the one who made it into this big thing." His words, "This isn't just about the party," interrupted me. "It's about everything. The way you talk to me, the way you dismiss me when I try to say how I feel. If you really respected me, you wouldn't treat me like this." My cheeks started to get hot. "James, don't act like you're some perfect angel in all of this. You don't stand up for yourself. You let me handle everything, and now you want to sit here and act like I'm the bad guy? Maybe if you stepped up more, I wouldn't have to take charge all the time." His words, "That's not an answer," interrupted me. "Why did you even marry me if you don't respect me? Was it convenience? Because I was a safe choice? Or was there something else? Because I'm starting to think I'm not the person you actually wanted to marry." The words hit me like a slap and I froze. "That's ridiculous," I blurted out. "You're twisting this into something it's not." "Am I?" he asked, his voice suddenly raised. "Because the way you treat me doesn't feel like love, Wanda. It feels like I'm just here. Like I'm not enough for you. And maybe I never was." I yelled, "That's not true." But even as I said so, I could sense my defense beginning to crumble. "You're overthinking this. You're letting your friends get in your head, aren't you? They've been filling you with this nonsense, and now you're trying to blame me for things that aren't even real." "My friends didn't make me feel this way," he stated firmly. "You did. They just gave me the push to say something. And I'm glad they did because we can't keep going like this, Wanda. This isn't healthy. It's not fair to either of us." I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. "Oh, so what's the solution then? Counseling? Divorce? Are you just going to throw in the towel because I make a few jokes you don't like?" His words, "This isn't about the jokes. This is about respect. About whether or not you even want to be with me, because right now, it feels like you don't." I sneered. "That's insane. You're blowing this way out of proportion." "No," he answered, now speaking steadily. "I'm asking for the truth. Is there someone else? Or is it just that I was never the guy you really wanted?" For a moment, I was unable to speak as the question impacted me like a gut strike. I wanted to lash out and deny it, but something in his tone stopped me. He wasn't upset. He wasn't making accusations. He was simply finished. I pushed my chair back more forcefully than I intended to and got up. You know what, James? Maybe your friends were right. Maybe this is a lost cause. You want to sit here and play the victim like you've been some perfect husband, but you haven't been. And maybe, just maybe, I'm not the bad guy here. Maybe we're just not meant to be. He remained silent. Simply gave me this serene, nearly resigned face. I also noticed for the first time that he wasn't attempting to win the argument. He was attempting to determine whether he had anything left to defend. He whispered, "What do you want to do?" "Because I can't keep doing this, Wanda. We either fix it or we walk away." After he asked, "Fix it or walk away," James and I sat in quiet for what seemed like an eternity. He putting me on the spot like that was something I wasn't used to. Usually, he would concede, allow me to deflect, and things would return to normal. Not this time, though. The weight of his words hung between us, and he was being completely serious. I exhaled at last, trying to sound calm. "All right, if you want to fix it, we'll try counseling." I could see he wasn't expecting me to agree so fast because his eyebrows went up a little. "Really?" I leaned forward and clasped my hands together as if I were being sincere when I answered. "Yes. I don't want to throw this marriage away. If you think counseling will help, then let's do it." It was not an outright lie. Divorce was not what I wanted. James contributed to the fact that I enjoyed my life. However, what is the reality? I assumed that this was all a phase. After his buddy's brief motivational speech, he was feeling like himself, but he would soon return to reality. Making an appointment for counseling, yes. Doing it, really? That was a different matter. I promised him that I would locate a counselor and arrange for something, but weeks passed and I never did. Each time he mentioned it, I had an explanation. He seemed to believe me at first, but then he stopped asking me the same questions over and over again. "Oh, I've been so busy with work. The ones I found were all booked up," or "I'm waiting for someone to call me back." I assumed that he had moved on, as I had anticipated. Then he brought it up again one evening. He turned to face me while we were watching TV on the couch and asked, "You never scheduled counseling, did you?" I froze for a moment, then I got back up fast. "I told you, I've been trying. It's not as easy as it sounds, James." "Don't lie to me," he said in a forceful but composed tone. "You never planned to do it, did you?" Immediately defensive, I rolled my eyes. "Oh, come on, James. Don't act like I don't care about this marriage. I said I'd do it, and I will." "No," he concluded, interrupting me. "You won't. And you don't care, not enough anyway. If you did, we wouldn't even be here right now." "Here we go again," I crossed my arms and murmured. "Why do you always have to make me the bad guy?" He raised his voice and yelled, "Because you won't own up to anything. You don't respect me, Wanda. You don't even take this seriously, and honestly, I'm done pretending this is going to work. I want a divorce." Stunned, I gazed at him. "What did you just say?" He reiterated, "I said I want a divorce," in a firm voice. "This isn't healthy. You don't respect me, and I can't be with someone who doesn't even want to try to fix things." I chuckled, but mainly because I couldn't believe it. "You're not serious." "I am," he answered, fixing me with his gaze. "I've been serious for a while now. I just needed to make sure this isn't fixable, and it's not." "You're acting absurdly," I shook my head. "You're just mad right now. You'll calm down and see how stupid this is." "No, Wanda," he firmly stated. "I'm not mad. I'm clear. I deserve better than this." It dawned on me then. He wasn't playing a bluff. He wasn't attempting to argue or prove a point. He meant it. He desired to leave. And I became anxious. I got up and glared at him, saying, "Are you kidding me? You want a divorce? After everything I've done for you? After all the years I've put up with you being weak and passive and—" He snapped. "Stop." But I chose to ignore him. I shouted, raising my voice. "No, you're going to hear this? You're pathetic, James. You've always been pathetic. You let me walk all over you for years, and now suddenly you think you're some big man because your little friends told you to grow a backbone? You're a joke." "Wanda!" "No," I cried out, tears now pouring down my cheeks. "I wish I never married you. You're an embarrassment, a fragile, weak excuse for a man. You can't even handle a little joke without running to your friends like a child. And now you think you're better than me?" When I was done, my chest was heaving with emotion and I was trembling. However, as the words lingered, I came to the realization that no one else was to fault. Not his pals, not James, nobody. Only me. His expression was unreadable as he gazed at me for a considerable amount of time. Then he got to his feet and went to the door. He whispered, "You don't have to say anything else. I'll stay at Mike's for now. You can call me when you've had time to think about what you really want." And he was gone in an instant. I wasn't in charge for the first time in our whole relationship. And I wasn't sure if I wanted him to return for the first time. After James told me he wanted a divorce, weeks passed. Although he spent most of his nights at Mike's residence, he returned occasionally to pick up clothing or organize his belongings. It seemed like he was someone else every time I saw him. It seemed as though I was a stranger to him because he no longer spoke to me warmly or looked at me the same way. It also killed me. He kept it brief and courteous, as if he were speaking to a coworker he hardly knew, but I would try to strike up a conversation with him whenever he stopped by, anything to break the ice. I'd crumble the moment he departed. I used to sob while sitting on the couch, wondering how things had gone so horrible so quickly. Even though I detested the circumstance, I was unable to accept any genuine accountability for it. It was his fault, I reminded myself, because he had allowed his buddies to turn his mind against me. I had to think that in order to prevent myself from becoming overwhelmed with remorse. The divorce was as equitable as it could have been when it was finalized. Neither of us left with more than the other, and nobody got messed over. We divided the savings equally, and I kept the house and he kept the automobile. However, it didn't feel like a victory. I felt as though I had lost a piece of myself that I would never be able to regain. James completely ceased coming around after the documents were signed. Occasionally, I would see updates on his Facebook page, which included images of him hiking in areas I didn't even know he liked or grinning with Mike and the boys. He appeared content. Even free. Furthermore, his friends' remarks demonstrated their unwavering support for him. I completely stopped receiving messages from people I assumed were our friends. No more party invitations, no more texts asking how I was doing. I felt as though I had been entirely excluded from the group. Initially, I was upset. How could they all be so unfaithful to me, but I understood in my heart why. I wasn't buddies with them. They didn't like me, and they were his. Perhaps they never did. James's contentment was more bothersome to me than everyone else's silence 3 months after the divorce. He was better off without me, and I was reminded of this every time he shared an update or a photo. More than anything, that hurt. The smile in his pictures didn't look phony, but I wanted to think he was just acting. He appeared robust. Not the same. Like the guy I once hoped he would be, but it's too late to make a difference. I made an effort to divert my attention and move on, but nothing seemed right. Apps for dating were a joke. The men I encountered were either strange, impoverished, or seeking something that I didn't have. I had lost any sense of what I desired. I just knew that I didn't want to be left on my own. But that possibility began to seem more plausible with each week that went by. I continued to convince myself that the divorce was a good thing. The man I needed was not James. That I would find a stronger, more capable person who could manage me. But that tiny voice in the back of my mind kept telling me I had messed up every time I saw his name appear in my newsfeed. And that perhaps, just possibly, I had been the issue all along. However, I would never say that aloud, not to anybody.